introduction, you learned how to enter the sum function, which is a single argument function. In this lesson, you will learn how to use various other single argument statistical functions. And you will be introduced to multiple argument statistical functions. I'll also show you an easy way of remembering how to do statistical functions. There's actually a button on Excel that makes this even easier than I'm going to first show you. So let's start out by putting some numbers down. Let me put down, let's say the number 1, then maybe 2, then maybe 3. Let me skip a space, show you what happens if there's a blank cell. Put another number, maybe 2 again, maybe 4, 4, and 5. And maybe I should put down a word, just show you what happens if there's something that's not a number in the cell. By the way, when I type in word, it just stays there. Let me go up and delete this 5 again and type in a 5 again. When I put in the 5, notice it starts on the left side, but when I hit enter, it moved to the right side. But here, when I type in the word word, when I hit enter, it just stays on the left side. It's not that important, but it's kind of interesting to tell you. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to do some statistical functions, some single argument statistical functions. Here is a list of some of the functions that we'll be covering. Actually, these aren't functions, these are magic words. Let me explain what I mean by that. If I want Excel to do something, a function, I first put in an equal sign to tell it that I want it to do something, not just print out what I print, but to take that information and go do something with it and bring me back an answer. In this, after following the equal sign, I need to tell it a magic word. In this case, the magic word is count. All I'm going to have it do is count the cells that have numbers in it. The next thing I do after I tell it the equal sign to tell it I want it to do something, the magic word to tell it what it is I want it to do, following that in parentheses I tell it where the data are that I want it to do this thing to. In this case we started with B2 and we went down to B10. So I put B2 and a colon. A colon is a dot over another dot. Don't put a semicolon because that won't work. B10, end your parenthesis, and now we'll press the enter button and it should give me an answer. It does. It says that there were 7 cells between B2 and B10 that have numbers in them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's true. What if I wanted to count the cells that have anything in them, numbers or words? Well, then I can use this other function, which is called count A. Equal sign, count A, left parenthesis, B2, colon, B10, end of parenthesis, enter. And there were 8 cells. 1, 2, 3, not this one, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cells that had something in it, either a word or a number. What if I wanted it to count the cells that had nothing in it? Well, then I could put count blank. So count blank, left parenthesis, B2, colon, B10, end of parenthesis, hit enter. And there's 1 blank cell in this range that I gave it. Now notice if I click on this cell again, up here it tells me what it is I typed. Inside the cell it tells me the answer. Up here in the formula bar it tells me what it is I typed to get this answer. The next thing is the mean. And the magic word for mean is average. So we'll put an equal sign, the word average. Let me make it a capital E just to show you that it doesn't matter if it's mixed case or capital or not capital. So here I'll put a end of parenthesis, B2, colon, B10, end of parenthesis, and hit enter, and the average is 3. Now that's not the average of I mean, what's it the average of? It's not the average of this word or of this blank. It's only an average of those cells that have numbers in it. So it's an average of this number, this number, this number, not this, but this number, this number, this number, and this number. So it's the average of these 7 numbers is 3. Let's find the median. The median, I've typed in an equal sign, type in the word median. Helps if I spell it correctly. Left parenthesis, then B2, colon, B10, end of parenthesis, hit enter, and there it is. Now the next thing I want to show you is the mode. Now the mode is one I do need to warn you about. The mode is the number that occurs the most often in your data set, the value that occurs the most often, or that has the highest frequency. In our data, 1 only occurs once. 2 occurs 2 times. 3 only occurs once. 4 occurs 2 times. 5 only occurs once. So there's 2 numbers that tie for the mode, the number 2 and the number 4. But Excel will only tell us one of those, and it won't tell us that there's another one to be found. So the mode is a little bit dangerous. When you find a mode, that doesn't mean it's the only mode. B2, colon, B10. So be careful when you work with mode. Let's try deviation squared. What this is the sum of the squared deviations. I'm not sure if you're already this far in your reading, but this is if we take the deviation from each score and then square them and then add them up. And in this case, we'll get equal, we'll put in div square, SQ, left parenthesis, probably help if I move the cursor, B2, colon, B10, end of parenthesis, and hit enter. And I get 12. That's the sum of the squared deviations. Now the variance is the sum of the squared deviations divided by the number of scores I have, if these scores represent the entire population. Actually, I need to go down to this one to do that one. So we have 12, and it'll be 12 divided by 7 if it's a population. But let's go ahead and do this by using a function. I'll put an equal sign, then VAR, that means the variance, and I put a P because it's for the entire population. That means these are the only numbers we care about, these 7. I'll put a close or an opening parenthesis, B2, colon, B10, whoops, B10, end of parenthesis, and now I'll hit enter. And I get 1.714286. Let's see if this is really 12 divided by 7. Well, I'll go over here and I'll say equal 12 divided by 7 equals, yep, that's exactly the same number. Let's try the variance, this variance. This is the variance if all you have is a sample. So we're trying to find out the variance of the entire population based only on a few numbers that are our sample. Could be a large number of numbers, but they're only a sample. They're not all the numbers in the population. So let's see what we get when we do that. We'll press equal. We'll type in the magic word VAR, tell it where our data are, B2, colon, whoops, B2, colon, B10, end of parenthesis, and I'll hit enter, and that ends up to be 2. Now I'm not sure if you're this far yet in your reading, but all this is the sum of squares divided by the number of numbers we have minus 1. So what we have is the sum of squares is 12. So I put in 12 divided by, and then it's the number of numbers we have minus 1. So I'll put, we have 7 numbers minus 1. I'll close that and go like that, and you see I get the same number, 2. So 2 is a variance. And you don't need to know this, although conceptually you should know this formula for statistics. But to use Excel, you don't need to do it. All you need to know is equal, VAR, tell it where your data are, and it gives you the answer. Standard deviation is the square root of your variance, and you should know that by the time you finish this course, definitely. But all we need to do it in Excel is STDEV, left parenthesis, B2, colon, B10, and this should be the standard deviation based on a sample. If I wanted the standard deviation based on a population, I'd put equal STDEV and then put a P after it, and then a left parenthesis B2, B2, colon, B10, end of parenthesis, and hit enter. The average deviation, this is the average of the absolute value of deviations from the mean. And it's also something that we don't use that very often in statistics, but you will learn about it in this course. So we just put equal sign AVE, DEV, left parenthesis, B2, colon, B10, end of parenthesis, hit enter. That's it. A skew, maybe you know what that is by now. It's either positive, negative, or 0, and this will tell us how skewed our data are and the direction. So this is skew, B2, colon, whoops, B2, colon, B10, end of parenthesis, hit enter. And in this case, our data is not skewed at all. So we end up with a 0. If we ended up with a negative number, that would mean it was negatively skewed. And the further the number is from 0, the more skewed it is. Let's try kurtosis. This time I'm going to forget to put in the equal sign. I'll go K-E-R-T. This is a mistake, but I'm doing it on purpose just to show you. Left parenthesis, whoops, left parenthesis, B2, colon, B10. Now what happens? Well, it just types it. It doesn't do anything because I didn't tell it to do anything because I didn't put in an equal sign. So I'll go back up here, and rather than type in the whole thing, I'll just go up here to the formula bar, click in front, and add my equal sign, press enter, and it tells me that in this case it's got a negative kurtosis. That is, it's platykurtic. It's not as nicely rounded at the top as a normal curve. It's flatter on the top. To do something called the box whiskers plot, you need to know the highest number and you need to know the lowest number, also to calculate the range. To do this in Excel, all you do is put equal sign, max tells you the highest value in your data, and B2, colon, B10, end of parenthesis, hit enter, and it'll also tell you the lowest number, which is minimum, or min, and this is B2, colon, B10, end of parenthesis, and hit enter. So that is how you do single argument statistical functions in Excel. It's pretty easy. All you do is you put in an equal sign, you put in your magic word that tells it what it is you want it to do, then you tell it where the data are that you want it to consider, and then you press close your parenthesis and press enter. Now what happens if I enter another number? Let's go here to this blank number and let's put in the number, well, let's put in a ridiculous one. Let's put in 256. Now what should this do to my average? Well, the average should go way up. The skew should go way up. Let's find out what happens. I'll hit enter and all those numbers change just magically because it's going to take whatever numbers are in my range and use those numbers. And if those numbers change, these answers will change. That's a very nice thing about Excel, is you can put in your statistical functions and then play around with the numbers and you can see what they are. I'll remove this and we'll go back to the numbers we had before. If you're anything like me, you're probably saying to yourself, wow, that looks easy, except how am I going to remember all those dang magical words? There's so many of them. How am I going to keep them all straight? Well, it turns out that Excel has a button that'll make it so that you don't need to remember them by yourself. If you do remember them, they're easy to use. But if you don't, you can look right here, and it's called the Paste Function button. Now, on XP, it's right here. It's this F with this little X. However, on earlier versions, this FX used to be up here somewhere. So if you don't find it right here, if you have an earlier version, look for this FX up over here. Let me click on the FX. Now, when you do that, you get this categories brought up. Usually it says that. But if I click here, I can get all sorts of categories of different functions. This is the most recently used functions. This is all functions, financial functions, math and trig functions. Here's the one we want, is statistical. Now, if you have an older version of Excel, older than XP, your box will look a little different than this. Instead of having this pulled down category, you'll have all these categories on the left side and these categories on the right side. But it works the same way other than that. It's just a design change. So I'm going to click here on statistical, and here are all the different kinds of statistical arguments that there are. And if I click on one, it tells me what it does. If I click on count blank, it says counts a number of empty cells in a specified range of cells. If I click on another one, deviation squares, returns the sum of the squares of deviations of data points from their sample mean. So it tells you what that happens if you use that magic word. Now let's say that I want to do the standard deviation of the population. Well, I'm going to try and guess what that looks like. Or I could type in a description here and it'll find it for me. But that's only on XP or later versions. On earlier versions, we don't have this nice search function. So let me just guess that standard deviation would start with an S. And here's some. If I click on here, it says estimates the standard deviation based on a sample. Well, I want it based on a population, so I'm going to guess it's this one. Calculate standard deviation based on the entire population given as arguments. That's the one I want. Now, if I click OK, up comes a box, a dialog box. And what I need to do here is I need to put in where my data range, where the data points are that I want it calculated on. So I put in my B2 colon B10 right here. And then it'll tell me the answer here. When I hit OK, it'll paste it in the box I want. Let me show you another thing I could do. Instead of using this, I could click on this little thing right here. It's got a red dot in it. If I click on that, then I can highlight the data, say B2 all the way down to B10, and it puts the data range in right here for me. Then when I click this, it's put it in for me. Now, in later versions like XP, you don't even need to hit that thing on the right. You could just go down here and highlight, and it'll put it in for you. So you can do it either by manually typing or by doing your drag, your highlighting of the data, and it has these marching ants around it. And then I press, and I should get exactly the same answer. So you don't need this fantastic memory. All you need to remember is, if you don't remember, click this FX, and it'll help you find the magic word. Sometimes, though, we'll have data that has more than one argument. Here's an example of one that would be that case. Let me use this FX one. Let's go down to quartiles would be a good example. Let me go to quartiles. Quartile is a multi-argument one because we have to say which quartile we want. Do we want the first quartile, the second quartile, or the third quartile? So here I'll click on quartile. I'll say OK. And it'll ask me for the array, that is, where's the data, B2 colon B10, and then which quartile do I want? by the way, when I click in here, it tells you, it says quartile is a number, minimum value for here is 0, first quartile put a 1, median value put 2, third quartile put 3, maximum value. So let's say I want the first quartile, so I'll put a 1. And then I hit enter, and there, my first quartile in this case is the number 2. That's a multi. Let me show you how that looks. Well, actually, I can click on it. This is what I type. I put an equal sign, the word quartile, a left parenthesis, B2, colon, B10, comma, and then I tell it the second argument, which is what quartile I want. Let me do that for the third quartile. Equals quartile, left parenthesis, B2, colon, B10, comma. I want the third quartile, so I put a 3. I press that, and I hit enter. Now, it turns out that some very complicated, I've never used them, but I understand that some arguments some function arguments, not statistical, but some other functions can require up to 30 arguments. Now, that may seem like a lot, but my mother-in-law can have more than 30 arguments before she has her morning coffee. So in that perspective, it's not a lot of arguments, but to me it would be. But this is what I wanted to show you this lesson, is how to use these statistical functions. They're so easy, and they make life really easy for you if you'll just learn how to use some of these statistical functions. The next thing we'll learn is a tool that does statistics for us even easier than the functions when it comes to more complicated problems. It's a tool, a data analysis tool, and we'll learn about that in the next lesson.